Thank you all for joining for another Saturday satsang, where we speak about, discuss the topic of happiness in daily living. And as most of you would have heard me say many, many times, happiness is something very particular. The happiness that is available for the human being on a continuous, unbroken basis is not happiness that comes from pleasure, not happiness because we get what we want in the form of circumstance. That would be either pleasure or pain if the circumstance is not in line with our preferences or what we would like. Happiness turns out to be happiness through peace of mind in daily living, which means peace of mind regardless of the circumstance that we find ourselves in. And what is peace of mind? Peace of mind turns out to be not a peaceful feeling, as in a feeling that comes in where we say, oh, I feel this peace as something. But peace of mind is rather the absence of suffering. And what is suffering? Suffering is the psychological movements of thought which at their core have the me idea in them, and the thoughts are an uncomfortableness or a diminishing of the sense of me because of the attitude towards circumstance in the past, circumstance in the present, or circumstance in the future. And so that psychological movement that is essentially thought, and it's a thought about our idea of who we are, and we can call that the me idea. And that me idea, which is really the false identity because it comes into existence as part of a thought stream. It's not something in and of itself, but it's something that explodes into existence essentially with the stream of thought. And that stream of thinking that at its center has the me psychological identity there, is uncomfortable with itself ultimately because it is a very vulnerable and fragile thing, something that the thought believes that it is dependent on a lot of things, and that its wholeness, its completeness is dependent on people appreciating it, respecting it, being honest to it, life delivering pleasure, good outcomes and not bad outcomes. And the nature of life and the nature of daily living amongst other people is very unlikely to be what the me would like. And so essentially the me is so used to feeling diminished and attacked by its existence, its quasi-existence, as a belief of what it is and what it needs. It's so used to feeling attacked because of its quasi-existence in this life that it essentially is a very fragile entity and is often, or by its nature, uncomfortable at its core, uncomfortable with being here. And so that is suffering. And so the death, the dissolution of that psychological identity, the uprooting, the dissolving of the deeply ingrained belief structures means the end of that psychological me, which means the end of the uncomfortableness, the end of the suffering, which leaves behind peace of mind. Now, where does this peace of mind come from? It it is the background that is usually obscured by the suffering. And so as the suffering dissolves, when the psychological identity in the form of these ingrained beliefs dissolves, then the peace of mind is a reflection of the nature of our true self, the essence that is much more real than transitory thought that comes and goes, that is always changing, which is what the psychological me identity is made up of. And so part of the journey of a seeker is to come to know one's true nature, one's essence, that which is said to have never been born and will never die. And those are pointers when the true self is revealed and comes to remember itself and recognize itself, then the concepts, even a concept of what you really are, was never born and will never die, are not how the self knows itself. It doesn't know itself through these concepts. There can be an appreciation from the direct sense of self and knowing oneself, knowing the nature of oneself. There can be an appreciation of what those concepts were pointing at. And there'd also be an appreciation that the mind, when it listens to the concepts, and even though they're very helpful pointers, the mind is never really going to know what those concepts are pointing at in the nuanced way. That's something that is self-evident when the false sense of self subsides and allows for the true self to shine through and actually be. And in that state of being, there is an appreciation of what we really are. And it's that nature of oneself, our consciousness, we could say, or the consciousness, that which exists and is aware of its own existence and aware of the manifestation in daily life. It is that consciousness that comes to appreciate that at the deepest level, it is completely devoid of thought, completely devoid of experience, completely devoid of time or space. And yet, it knows itself to exist. And that is where the fear of death, not on a biological level, but the fear of death dissolves when the essence of self is revealed to itself. It is from that understanding, and understanding doesn't refer to an intellectual understanding, but the direct knowing. It is from that direct knowing that an attachment to circumstance essentially happens, or the dissolving of attachment to circumstance happens. And what is the dissolving of attachment to circumstance? The dissolving of attachment to circumstance means there is no longer the sense of me that is convinced that its existence, its wholeness, is dependent on things working out well. what is inevitable in life is that the body is going to die. The body will come to an end. And if the sense of self, what we know ourselves as, is dependent on form, then this inevitability is petrifying to the false me or the psychological identity. It is its end. It is the ultimate attack that it can imagine. However, the true self, the essence of consciousness, when it's known, it's known that it is not of this world. It knows itself as being prior to form, prior to thought, prior to experience, prior to the body, prior to the senses. And this is something that happens on a gradual peeling back of the layers of consciousness, all the way back to a revelation of the consciousness prior to the world. And that's what's referred to as Nirvikalpa Samadhi, which is a meditation state where there is the complete absence of thought and senses and the world of form, no memory, because it reveals itself that memory is dependent on the existence of the layer of thought and or the layer of the world experience. And it's something not easy to describe. Even the awareness that is usually there in meditation, an awareness of nothing, of even that awareness isn't present in the way we assume must always be the case if there is to be a knowing of oneself. There is an assumption if I'm going to know myself as consciousness even, there must be awareness of oneself. And maybe that's not such a incorrect presupposition, but the awareness, if there is awareness that knows oneself, and there is this undeniable, even in that absence of thought and experience in the world of form, when there is an emergence out of the meditation, there is this deep intuitive sense that I was in that Nirvikalpa Samadhi. I was, and yet awareness in the form that is present when the world of form is there, and even in the meditation state just prior to Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the awareness is very different in the two states. One is a sort of outward awareness, and the other is the absence of that outward awareness. And so it is a touching into the deep essence of self that essentially burns away the attachment and the belief that what I am is the body and the thoughts and the emotions. And so the suffering, which is this craving and craving for outcomes, a resistance of life when it doesn't deliver those outcomes, a resistance um, towards our actions of the past and actions of others that happened in the past, complaining and defending ourselves vehemently in the present moment against what someone has said or someone else's beliefs, or our own inadequacy in the moment in relation to a topic or a conversation or a way of performing or functioning in life, behaving in life. There's all sorts of judgments, justifications, and then there is also a whole lot of thinking about the future, expectations and plans and ideas. And all of that, looking into the past, complaining about the present, looking out into the future, all of that thinking, and when we look at it, we'll find there is this stream of thinking, includes this me idea in it. And the me in the thinking is not at all a reflection of the true self. It is me as this body of form, and there's no appreciation in the me thought and the me identity of consciousness. So that's the suffering. As the nature of the world is revealed, and that nature is essentially a world of form, but that form is just apparent form. It's the senses. So we've got what we call the sense of sight, of sound, of smell, of taste, and importantly, of touch. Touch is the sense that people seem to give most credence to. It's like, if I can touch something and it's there, then it's real. We're more likely to accept that the sense of sight might be a bit of an illusion. We've all seen optical illusions, so we tend to question the complete validity or truth of sight. However, when it comes to the sense of touch, we seem to be less willing to consider the illusory nature of that. But when we think about it, we'll see that both the sense of touch and all the other senses are essentially all being experienced on the other side as the final result of electrical impulses that have been sent to the brain, processed, and then projected onto consciousness. And that is the conscious experience of the world. And so the world essentially is an appearance in consciousness. And that appearance dissolves in certain meditations, or in most meditation, once the thinking and the senses withdraw, it becomes apparent that the world that we interact with, or that is present through our daily living, is actually much less tangible than we have taken for granted for our whole life. Now we've taken it for granted, or we've assumed the world to be much more tangible than it can come to be known as, because of the experience of it. It is consistently there. in a particular way. It is consistently experienced through the senses. And unless there is a deep inquiry into the nature of the senses and the experience of the senses, then the experience is taken to be a representation of truth. And so in the experience, there is the sense of touching an object that appears to be outside of us. And so we say, well, there is a sense that is there when the hands touch the object, and it's not there when the hands don't touch the object. And so it's telling us that that object is really there. I think that for a seeker, one of the most significant inclusions in our life experience is the fact that there are night dreams at night. And so many of the conclusions that we've made about daily life, the reality of daily life, can be undermined by us equating life with the experience of dreaming, and seeing that, in essence, the two experiences are possibly not that different in principle. And if we didn't have that example of having an experience at night where the dream character would have absolutely no way of seeing that the world in which it exists is not real. And yet, for the human who wakes up, well, it appears this way, that it appears that we wake up out of sleep, and there can be a contemplation of the dream where, from the human who has woken up out of their bed and out of their night sleep, can appreciate that the character in the dream and the dream environment were not real in and of themselves. They were real as an appearance. Or it existed as an appearance in consciousness, temporary, transient. Time and space were not fundamental. Time and space within the dream came into existence as part of the dream framework. And if it was just me suggesting this, then I'd expect everyone to take it with a grain of salt. I'm going to point you beyond what I'm saying, to any number of wisdom teachings that you can find and probably have come across already, that are pointing to the nature of life as a play of consciousness. In Sanskrit, it's lila is the word for the play of consciousness. And Maya is another word for the illusion of life. And this becomes more and more clear as or more and more evident as the nature of self in its different expressions, because the self in the manifestation expresses itself as outward projecting consciousness. And there are other expressions of self that sort of regress back to a much more basic expression of self, where it becomes apparent the world is simply an appearance that has no fundamental existence. So what does that mean about the actions and interactions that happen in daily life? If I'll speak for a little bit longer, if anyone has any questions, I'd like to move into some question and answers in the satsang. So please put your electronic hand up and we'll take the questions. So what does this mean about our daily life experience if it doesn't have a fundamental existence? We still end up living life as if it is real. Once the unrealness has been seen, or maybe we put it differently, once the nature of life and self has been seen to be consciousness, then life carries on until the death of the body. And it becomes obvious that the purpose of life beyond the realization of self is to live the creation as the creation has been designed to be lived. And it's been designed to be lived not as an illusion, but as if it is real. Now, I wouldn't say that that is the objective for the seeker. For the seeker, the objective would be to appreciate the unrealness of life. But then the process carries on, where we live as if life is real. Now, putting that aside for now, from a seeker's point of view, what does the fact that we're talking about life as a creation, an imagination in consciousness, what does it mean? It means that the characters are all part of the creation. What the characters do is not separate from the manifestation, not separate from the manifestation of consciousness. So a useful way of looking at life as it unfolds for you moment after moment after moment is as if life is a predetermined creation, unfolding exactly as it's destined to unfold, including your thoughts, your feelings, your words, your actions, and all of the interactions between yourself and the other, yourself and nature, all of the responses that you have to circumstance and the outcomes, the reactions, all of that. Nothing fits outside of the creation. Now, this attitude towards life, meaning the attitude of non-doership, is very meaning I am not the doer of my life. Life is happening to me. I am being lived, and everyone else is being lived. Life is a happening. Life is a story unfolding. Now, these concepts can be challenged, and it's important to say that a teaching is accurate insofar as accurate as a teaching, accurate for the purpose that it's intended for, and designed in a particular way. However, the concepts in the teaching although they are accurate pointers, are not intended to be a form of truth. The concepts are concepts. Whatever anyone has ever said or will ever say is a concept, not the truth. The only truth in the manifestation is the impersonal sense of I am, the impersonal sense of existence that can be known beyond the intellect. So take Ramana's teachings. There are some teachers that have a sense around them, and because of the way that they approach this topic, particularly from a top-down point of view, talking about the self, there is a relationship to those teachings that may sometimes lead us to think that whatever is uttered is the absolute truth. But those teachings too are essentially conceptual whenever the words are spoken or words are written down. And Ramana himself tells us this. He says one of the ways that, well, that the process unfolds is for the seeker to use the concepts to dissolve blocks and to see past obstructions, to see past the current limitations. However, the concepts that we used and were helpful to allow a movement past certain limitations or boundaries, useful at dissolving certain beliefs or ideas about how life is, they too need to be discarded. And the analogy or the saying that Ramana put forward said, use this thorn, talking about the spiritual concept, to remove the thorn that is embedded in your thumb. Now, the thorn embedded in the thumb is the deeply ingrained false beliefs that makes up the psychological identity, the me belief. So use this thorn to uproot the thorn embedded in your thumb, but then be sure to throw both thorns away. For if we don't throw both thorns away, the likelihood is that the second thorn becomes embedded in the thumb in place of the first thorn. Now, that's not a warning that is going to prevent the second thorn from becoming embedded in the thumb. It's almost inevitable that the concepts will be taken as truth. However, it's there as a spotlight for the seeker to become aware of the fact that these thorns that have been used to uproot the initial problem have in themselves become embedded in the thumb. And once it is seen that the concepts have become embedded as in the thumb as a belief, then they too will be uprooted with another thorn, being maybe even this concept, this saying, and then both thorns will be thrown away. So Nicholas has his hand up. And then Amit. Hi, Nicholas.
Hi, Roger. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Let me try and start my video. No, it doesn't want to start. Um, I came across you a couple of months ago, and it's been like entering a tunnel, and I've been in satsang pretty much permanently since then, with you on a daily basis. Um, So the teaching resonates very, very strongly with me. And um, I just on a practical level just wanted to ask you about I'm in a job I don't like, in a country I don't really like. And um, I just wonder from a practical point of view, and I accept that uh, whatever is destiny will happen. But on a practical point of view, or from a practical standpoint, um, is the desire in me, do you think, to get out of this job? I don't hate it as much as I did a couple of months ago, I have to say. So things are plateauing or feeling better anyway. Let me put it that way. I feel better. I feel calmer, and it's easier for me to do the work.
Mhm.
But I still want to change it. And I wonder if it's coming from the expectation aspect and wanting it to fulfill me in that respect, or if it's just a practical thing. It's like, it's okay. I mean, you don't like your job, you don't like the country you live in. It's natural to want to move away from that. And so I was just sort of kind of asking how to be aware or just, I don't know, how to approach it, I suppose.
Yeah. So the concept in the teaching that says your happiness is not dependent on circumstance, but rather your attitude to circumstance can sometimes um, confuse the situation, or a seeker will hear that and say, "Oh well, um, the resistance that's there to my job must all be attitudinal." That I should be able to, according to the teaching, be happy even in this circumstance. And the teaching is really saying that you'll you'll be happy in any circumstance if there's no attachment and no doership, if the attitude of attachment and the attitude of doership have dissolved. um, However, if you picked the job, let's say, because of attachment, and then are stuck in the job because of attachment, then there isn't obviously going to be peace of mind in relation to the the job, because there's a attachment, um, was part of, let's say, moving towards the job in the first place. Um, and this is more obvious in relationships. For example, you might find yourself in a relationship, and someone might think, "Oh, I should be able to be happy regardless of circumstance." However, if what took someone into the relationship was attachment to outcome or personal doership, then waiting for happiness to exist in that relationship, I mean, happiness in the form of peace of mind to have to exist in that relationship, assuming the relationship is still being held together by that attachment, it's not going to happen. um, so it's important to identify if you're remaining in the situation because of some deeply ingrained belief system that says, this is what you need to do. If you don't stick with this, you're going to be unsafe. You're everything, there's uncertainty. Um, and so if that's what's keeping you there, then that may well be the psychological fear, which means you're not going to be able to be
I
happy in
feel
that
like I don't have a
circumstance.
choice, I suppose. Otherwise, I'd leave tomorrow.
Right. Yeah, but maybe it's like I don't have a choice because if I did leave, then I'd lose all of these things. Um,
Mm.
but having said that, so once we've covered off that part of it, there is also the part of it. There's a validity that sometimes we don't have a choice, um, and that you just have to be. There's people in the world that work 12, 14 hours of hard labor and they don't have a choice. It's the only way they can keep their family alive, or they're imprisoned, or whatever the situation is. So that's another situation, and if that's the case, then it really does come down to one's attitude, um, and that's going to make all the difference, whether the attitude of doership and attachment is there. If you have no choice, then the the attitude of involvement might fall away if that's recognized. And lastly, we go to the situation you spoke about, is that sometimes we just don't, it's not in line with our biological preferences. We didn't realize beforehand. Now we realize. And so at some point in time, we may find another job, find an opening that allows you to leave the country and go somewhere different.
Yeah.
It's simply a matter of practicality. Now, it will all unfold according to destiny. That is life, as described in this teaching. However, the way destiny unfolds is through the mechanism of each of us deciding in the course of our life. Um, Now, those decisions, a decision doesn't mean it's a decision made by an autonomous entity. It is a thought that will arise, or a feeling that will arise in the body mind organism, that will lead to a decision, a choosing one of several options. And so that's how destiny will unfold. It's not just going to happen without what I could say your involvement. Attitudinally, we have to realize that your involvement is only going to happen according to destiny. Um, but if the
Another
belief,
teacher, yeah, another teacher of mine said to me before, well, if the thought keeps coming up and you let go, or you're there as passively as possible, if you know what I mean, um, then perhaps you'll feel you're ready to act on it, or it's ripe, or whatever. But if it keeps coming up, then that's a good indication that perhaps it's instinctually the right thing to do.
yes, I agree. I think that um, sticking with something that doesn't feel right is is probably driven by attachment. So if something keeps feeling off or out of line with your preferences, um, I think at some point you'll just say, um, let's make a change. And that point is likely to be um, shorter in duration if there is less of the psychological components at play. Um, but having said that, I'm sure you'll appreciate that we're not really in control of um, all of those, the interplay
Yes,
of
because
all
I
of
never
that.
would have ended up here had it been a choice, or it felt like it wasn't a choice at the time. It's just something that kind of happened, and then I felt like, oh, okay, shit, here I am. You know? So it kind of feels like a great big cosmic joke from the personal point of view because I hated school and I'm a teacher now.
Oh yeah.
So yeah. One other thing, quickly, I've noticed in the live satsangs anyway, since I started joining you, I feel very good. And another thing that someone said to me once was, when you're all joined together in a common cause or purpose or whatever you want to call it, there is a sort of exponential power about it, as opposed to when you're just, working on it on your own. And even when you're not, yeah, even early in the satsang, I wasn't listening to you very closely, but it was just I just felt very good. Is that something that you think is true?
Well, it's definitely a phenomena that happens, and so you have some seekers that become so dependent on being close to a teacher, often in the same physical location, because it tends to be even more so. Well, historically, at least, it was the only option. Um, and you'll have teachers that will sometimes kick people out because it's obvious that they're just it's a new codependence that's forming. But there can be a healthy version of it where and it's not just the teacher, it is also the sangha, because seekers will have their own clarity or degree of clarity, and so it's sort of all adds up to create a much more clarity than is generally available out in the world. um, and so yes, it is, I think, very much a phenomena that happens. And funnily enough, it is described by people as being available even over a distance. And I
Mm.
think just the nature of the words bring a relaxation to the mind. Just hearing the fact that we're not the doers, we don't have to um, have an attitude of trying to micromanage life. We can just sit back, and life is still, well, sit back, figuratively speaking, and life will carry on. When the doorbell rings, we'll automatically stand up and answer the doorbell. And if a great position landed in your inbox, you would read the email, and a, flow would happen. And we don't really believe that sometimes, but to hear it intuitively, it hits somewhere deep inside where,
Mm.
where it is believed.
Right in here.
Yeah, yeah.
Like when you're talking in the satsangs and the recordings, and you're talking about something in particular that resonates very strongly, it's almost like the piano key just got hit, the one that you're tuned in with, and that wire just resonated right with the core of your being. And that's why I suppose I listen to them over and over again. I mean, and what's wonderful, there's so many of them, and I really appreciate it. And thank you so much.
You're very welcome. On that note, we'll plug the upcoming retreat to everyone listening and those that listen to the recording. It's a month away from today, and there's currently a few positions left on the retreat. And so, Nick, having mentioned this phenomena, where it's useful as opposed to uh, not necessarily useful when it becomes a codependency. Where it's useful is if an environment has a certain resonance to it, and it is like a tuning fork on a piano tuning fork, our own suffering can be suspended or lightened a little bit. And then um, what is pointed at starts to become something you can feel. Now, that opening, even for a short period of time, may be enough to provide a momentum and enough to dissolve certain um, parts of the psyche that were preventing a progression. And so just a small opening can lead to a snowballing effect. So hopefully, if people are immersed in this sort of environment for a 3-week period where there's 2 satsangs a day, it's different to what we would experience usually in our life. So I encourage anyone who is on the fence or considering joining something like this, that the upcoming 3-week retreat, details on the website, is an option. So having said that, I'll move on to Amit. Hi, Amit.
Hello, hi Roger.
Hi.
So it's a bit practical question. So, like, if I try to meditate, like with closed eyes, and try to like feel kind of myself. So mostly, even in a daytime, when generally if I'll work, I know I won't sleep. I can work for 3 to 4, 5, 6 hours on a stretch. But into those duration, it could be afternoon, even before meal, and not only because of meal. If I try to meditate and I'm finding inadvertently I go into sleep. I mean, I can't help much. It's hardly sometime it's within 5 to 10 minutes. Yeah, most of the times that is kind of what I'm feeling. And sometime in night or evening or maybe quite early morning, it's mostly I'll got into kind of a bit agitated and so much thoughts or so much self-pity start coming into that. I have to distract. I mean, I have to get up, uh, start watching something on a mobile somehow to distract me. Else, that feeling keep getting deeper. So, what do you suggest about this?
When you fall asleep, are you sitting up or lying down?
No, I'll be sitting up,
Mhm.
and yeah. I mean, if there will be any noise or something, I'll wake up. I mean, it's not deep. That's another thing. I mean, it won't be deep, but kind of, yeah, I won't be feeling my, somehow I'll be lost.
Mm. I think that sleep is, I wouldn't fight it, to be honest. I think if your body is going to sleep, it's a sign that it needs the sleep, maybe, or because you can't make yourself sleep. So if the body is drifting off into sleep, I think that's okay. Even listening to satsang, if you fall asleep, I think it's okay. We can't force ourselves, or you can't force meditation. There's times when I went years without meditating in the spiritual seeking process, and it felt fine that no meditation was happening. There was surely a lot of other things taking place. So when it comes to meditation, I think it's very important not to have the seeker driving meditation. And so that means if you sit in meditation and you fall asleep, the seeker has no job to do. It has no job to do in regard to even judging whether that was successful or not successful. That's what I would suggest. So, is there a reason why you are meditating?
Um, uh, yeah. So, yeah, it's something um, kind of it's a kind of uh, feeling which like if I'll start immediately I could feel myself there is some feeling, but after some time it goes away and difficult to find it. So kind of it's a fresh at the moment when I touch it, it's there. Okay, it's okay. It's not like, it's a kind of good feeling, I'll say, that is there. But after some time, either it goes away or I'll drift to sleep, and in some other occasion I'll get agitated. Mostly I'll start thinking, or I mean, kind of this too much thinking that I'll have to distract myself again by something external. So yeah, so if I'll say like, so it's I'll say difficult to say why I'm meditating, or I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So if you feel like meditate, meditate. If you feel like meditate and you fall asleep, well, that's what happened. If you feel like meditating and then you find yourself with a lot of thoughts, stay a little bit longer and see if there is a movement beyond the thinking. And if not, and it becomes too much of a struggle, get up and say, well, I thought it would be a good idea to meditate. It turns out that today is not the day, or now is not the time. To resist it, to try and win, it's not the point. So, if you find yourself with a lot of thoughts and you give it some opportunity to move beyond, and it doesn't, then you say, okay, not the time to meditate. The reality is you might have had a time when meditation was a sort of solution. Like you felt like meditating, you sat down, and it was a relief from thinking. It was nourishing, rejuvenating. And then you might say, but I want that again. I want that to be what happens in my meditation today. That too, can become, that can be an attachment to an outcome. And that's where we have to say, okay, not today, if the thinking is too strong.
Okay, yeah. So one just a follow-up question. So today you're talking about like, I didn't get that, so just I want to clarify that. From waking to dream state, you said that when we go, I'm just not clear, like in dream state also we feel ourselves. It's because that real self is there, or is it like because me thought is there? Because this much I can say that in any of my dream I'm always there. So I just wanted to know that, is it like that ego part, myself part, which is driving, or is it like yeah? So I was not clear on that. So if you can. Thank you.
So in the waking state, which we would say is also the same as the dream state, essentially an experience in consciousness, there is the appearance of the body. There are the me thoughts of this particular body-mind organism, or of the seeker. So the specific characteristics of that of that seeker's me identity. But what is present in the waking state also is consciousness. And without consciousness, the sense of I, which is what also makes the person say, well, I exist. Now, we don't appreciate that we feel like I exist because of the pure consciousness that is functioning as part of the experience. So in the dream state, it's exactly the same. In the dream state, the world that we know as our house or our town or city, that dissolves. And what appears in the same space, in the same consciousness, is the dream environment. And in the dream environment, there is a body that is also part of the creation, the dream. And in that body, there are the same more or less the same me thoughts corresponding with Amit in the waking state. And there is a sense in the dream that I exist, I am, and that is because of the same consciousness that is functioning in the waking state. So there is really nothing different in principle in the waking state or in the dream state. What we normally say is we say, well, but in the waking state, there is a physical body. And in the dream state, I know that it's not a physical body. The error is that we are saying, well, in the waking state, there is a physical body, because the dream character, if we ask them in the dream, do you have a physical body? The dream character isn't going to know it's a dream character and is going to say, yes, of course, I have a physical body. In the waking state, it is the same. It is the appearance of a physical body, just like in the dream, an appearance of a physical body, not just the sight appearance, but the appearance to all of the senses, including the sense of touch. And Ramana makes it clear, and many other wisdom sages, that the dream state and the waking state are not different.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Hi, Ranko.
Hi, Roger.
Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. You said that about suffering, you described suffering. So for me, suffering is a feeling of uncomfortable energy, let's say, in the body. And what perceives that energy is consciousness. So after that, there is this movement of identification. And my question is really, what is in energetical sense, that movement of identification? Why does it happen? Why consciousness stick to that energy when it happens?
Oh, sorry, why does consciousness
Stick?
Stick. Well, I think if we look at what happens in life, we can say that this creation is a creation where consciousness does identify as the body. That clearly happens in life. So consciousness does identify as the body. Why? And we could say, well, it is like a divine hypnosis. It's what the creator of the manifestation wants the manifestation to be experienced as, wants it to be experienced from the perspective of a individual character, such that the consciousness is hypnotized to think it is the body and the thinking and the emotions. And the manifestation or the creation for some of the characters results in a disidentification or an awakening, such that the consciousness that was identified with the body, that identification is broken, and then consciousness recognizes itself prior to form, prior to the body. That would be my explanation. You could explain it sort of where someone says, well, it's just how the biological development of a human being is. And so far, the evolution of the human is quite an impressive evolution, especially if we compare ourselves to other animals and then much more simple forms of life. The human being is a very evolved entity. However, we can see that this identification with the body and with the thoughts, such that the consciousness that is present is lost or is covered up, or at least it's not appreciated by that which is aware of the outside world. So we're very much aware of, or what we call the outside world, the trees and the other people. What is aware of all of that? It is, well, we could say it's the human being, but ultimately it is the consciousness of the human being. And for whatever reason, most humans are not interested in the topic of consciousness. And when you're not interested in the topic of consciousness, then the nuance of consciousness sort of is lost. And there's no appreciation that we even are conscious. We are all conscious, but I think I'd say that less than 10% of the world's population has even considered their own consciousness. And out of that 10%, an even smaller percentage have significant insights about their own consciousness. And out of that small percentage, an even smaller percentage have really, really significant insights. And so we could say, well, it just seems like it's the evolution of biology that has achieved many amazing things, but has not quite got to the point where the essence of the person is clear. Now, I would say that it has to do in part with evolution itself, is that for a long time, until fairly recently, the body has needed to survive in a hostile world. And maybe an appreciation of our consciousness would make us less adapted to surviving in a hostile world where animals were willing to eat us. And so it may simply be a success of evolution to have hidden the consciousness of the human being from it. So what I'm saying is maybe a failing of evolution may actually be a triumph of evolution. So whichever way we say it, the fact is this is what seems to happen. We just need to look at the population. Consciousness is hidden, and at some point it for some it becomes recognized.
Yeah, so in my experience, like you described, this Nirokalpa Samadhi, that state when consciousness recognizes itself. For me, it happens automatically. There is no any kind of relationship, cause and effect relationship. When it happens, it just pops up, and it is there for some time, and then I just return back. So these are basically two different models. We can describe it as a development of biology, or just like more spiritual model, like consciousness. Everything is consciousness, and everything arises from consciousness. Basically, what fits us the most. And there is one more question there. So there are two words. The word suffering, and there is a word stress, which is mostly used in today's society. And as you described, we are developing into that point, and many doctors are recognizing stress as the most common disease for today's modern man. So would you say that suffering and stress are the same, or there is a difference?
I think they're interrelated. You can have stress that would just be biological stress. You just have too many tasks that you have to complete in a short period of time. You don't have enough time, pressure, financial pressure, and all of that creates a pressure. Now that starts off as just biological, but our tendency, but pressure is painful. It's not in line with most people's preference. And because the attitude of doership and attachment to outcome exists, if we have something in life that is painful, then simultaneously the attitude of doership is going to get involved. And as soon as that happens, then it is suffering. And so the stress and suffering will coexist, just like suffering and other forms of pain will coexist. But technically, you can have someone, for example, who has a post-traumatic type of stress or trauma, because they've been in a war zone, for example. And so the body is highly sensitive. And that can be just biological, but in the same way, you can see how the psychological attitude is going to take ownership over the fact that that's how the body has become, and it will blame circumstance. It will blame itself for not being able to overcome the sensitivity. And so then all of that will be psychological suffering, and it all gets mixed in together. So I think for most people, suffering and stress have become one thing. But if you can clear or if the suffering part dissolves, it doesn't mean you're going to be stress-free. So if you're free of suffering, you may still have certain forms of biological stress or trauma.
Yeah, I see it especially in my case, because sometimes this suffering causes stress. I really feel it's like a biological pain. In that sense, they are connected. And it can be like a large portion of that type of stress. And it will happen for a time, and then it will resolve. And for me, right now, maybe I'm just too much identifying word suffering and stress because of this my situation, because it's happening that way.
Yeah, it's a feedback loop, but if the circumstance doesn't change, and it's the circumstance that is causing the stress, then even without involvement, there's still going to be stress if it is circumstantial. So you have to keep. I'm sure you can. I know you know the difference. So hopefully these descriptions help shine some light on the fact that they can be very intertwined, but stress can also exist simply because of biology and circumstance.
Yeah, circumstance you can adapt in a way. So if you are suffering free, you can adapt. Circumstance you can slow down in a way. So even biological pain can be reduced a little bit.
Yes, if your circumstance doesn't, if there are options in the circumstance, then yes, of course, if there's a lot of stress and it's just circumstantial, then you might have to give something up. You might have to, give up work, which means less money maybe. But if it's an option, at some point you'll say, look, this stress is too much for my body. I need to rest. So I have to give up some of the money, let's say. Or, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm always amazed at parents, because to me, kids are there's such a commitment to raising children, that you have to, as a parent, you really have so many things to squeeze into a short period of time, and then the extra financial burden. So parents have my respect. That's pretty, that would be biologically stressful, I think.
But they're
Thanks,
willing
Franco.
to do that.
Yeah.
They're willing to do that. They know what it is parenting.
If they didn't know, they surely find out. Yeah. Thanks, Franco. Mateus, hi.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. This is my first ever being live on Satsang. I watched you for many years, but I never joined Satsang, so I'm actually a bit nervous. But I need to find my way through all the how to do with raising your hand and so.
I think just on that point, just not to, Bridget has her hand raised, or his hand raised. I can't see, it's very small. But there's an electronic hand. If you put that up, then I'll so click on the electronic hand, Bridget. Sorry, Matthias.
Yeah, no problem. I'm actually coming to Ubud for the retreat also.
Oh, very good. Yes.
So I'm really looking forward. It feels so strange to just go from YouTube clips to booking a 3-week retreat in Bali, just like that. But it really came natural to me that I wanted to find out if it would be possible, and then everything's just been possible, I guess, because everything seems to work out. So I'm really looking forward to meeting you and everyone else there soon.
Great. Yes.
But I had for me, it was so strange. I had many years ago, I had a strange thought that I wondered if everything in the world was just energy. Like it for me, for my mind, it was like logical that, but everything in the core has to just be energy in the most fundamental way. And so I think I identified like this sensation of myself with being that unified field of energy. But then I had this like I became very anxious, because then I was like, but if I am this unified field of energy, then I also feel responsible for a lot of things happening around me, like other people. The whole concept of me and someone else became this whole unified field of energy. And so I was drinking a lot of coffee at that time, so I was quite anxious from the beginning. So I don't know if it was like a fear-based thought or something, that I need to control my environment or something like that. But since then, I had a really hard time to get in touch with my emotions, or even know if I have any emotions, or like how to navigate the world. I mean, I remember how it was before I had this thought and everything, but it just felt so. Yes, I'm doubting the whole like, and then if that's a concept about how things work, then, for example, I was reading a bit about Buddhism and stuff like that. But for me, that's also like an intellectual concept, right? And that's also in the head. And like yesterday, I was just walking to the store and I thought, but what if I drop all concepts? Like the ultimate reality has to just be that which is here, like that what I can see, and which is without a thought. If you understand what I mean.
Yeah, sure.
And so I was just wondering how to ultimately, how do I navigate my life if with concepts, or like, is it more about just being aware of your thoughts and feelings? Maybe if it makes any sense, if that's a question.
Yeah. So there's concepts are important. We, cook food for ourselves according to concepts. You don't leave the egg in the water for a random amount of time. There is a concept that says and we drive a car according to concepts and road rules and all of that. When it comes to our sense of self and looking at the nature of life, and that's where we may say, okay, so those concepts that I have may actually be wrong. That that the concept about cooking the egg for 6 minutes is not that far off, because you do it and you get a reasonable result. But when it comes to, let's say, knowing oneself, knowing the nature of the world, you can see at some point, you start to see, oh, I've just believed what religion has told me, or what science has told me, or what satsang has told me. And I don't really know. And I don't know that that's true. And that's a great insight, that I don't know. So that is, there's a great freedom. All of our suffering is because we think we know. We think we know how the other should have treated us. We think we know what our life should look like. We think we know what the purpose of life is. So when it comes to suffering, I think that's where I don't know is very useful. If we apply that to everything, we might be taking it a bit too far. Because and that's not necessarily what the teachings are suggesting. So if we say, I don't know, I don't even know what I should be doing next, then we say that, but as you said, we can move to something is, let me not have a preconceived idea, but let me see what happens without there needing to be a thought. So, you'll move, there might be a feeling that, oh, I feel like going out for a walk. And so you start following that instead of your preconceived shoulds and shouldn'ts.
Yeah. And I also feel like I felt that freedom when I'm just like, the mind is just, there's so many concepts and just question marks about how everything is working and everything. And at the end of that, when you're just like, oh, I can't even take it anymore. Now I have no idea what's going on, and I'm just gonna leave a big, like, put it to the side. I don't even want to know. Like, and that's when you say it's a big relief, and just like, just leaving the whole subject and just being here and skipping all the questions about anything. But still, then the mind goes back sometimes and like, yeah, but you know, and it comes back and it starts asking questions, and sometimes you get like tangled in there again, I think. But
yeah, and then hopefully you see that and you say, actually, I don't know. I can't know.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully it becomes less and less, not so the duration of the big question mark is not so, becomes shorter and shorter. But yeah, actually I had the realization for maybe 2-3 months ago that all the thoughts that I have and all the emotions, that was and when I really realized that the concepts from this teaching was like starting to come up, was that I have no control over what thoughts or what emotions I'm getting in my, which is coming up in my body and that I'm experiencing. So it was like everything feels automated. Just that I have still like a natural reaction to react a bit to them because it feels like it's a habitual thing. But it's like I have a deeper understanding that keeps reminding me that, oh yes, but I can't do anything about it. And then I just release. It's like I put in neutral, and then I can just observe more that the thought processes and the emotions coming and going. And I feel when I'm meditating, because that's a question I had, then when all the thoughts come, and I have that thought that, oh, but I can't control any of this, so I really let go, and I can just, it's almost like I just observe everything that's happening. Is that like, is that my true place, or can I go further from that also?
The process, yeah, there is. The process will always take us deeper and deeper, and so what the mind wants is, it says, "Oh, I want to go, to the deepest." Let's say, but the deepest tends to be. We need to. It's like going through primary school. You can't go straight to grade 6. You have to start grade 1, and then grade 2 builds on grade 1, and then grade 3 builds on grade 1 and grade 2. And then in the case of the process, it's a stripping away of the structure. And as the structure gets smaller and weaker, then more and more is revealed, in a sense. The structure, the psychological structure, has a very strong power of it's very it's like on the stage, it takes up a lot of the limelight. And as it's getting stripped away, then more of the, let's say, that was relegated to the background can start to come forward. So, it's a gradual process. Now, what you've described already, so, if someone was listening to these satsangs and they weren't really drawn as a seeker, they just, someone says, "Oh, come and listen to this." There will be all sorts of interpretation of what's being said. Like if a psychologist listens, they'll listen to it from their profession perspective. If someone who is very involved in outcomes or very attached to outcomes, and they're very focused on tasks and projects that sort of say, this doesn't seem important. There's a small group that will listen to the concepts, and the concepts will start sinking in, like you've just described, where something starts happening in your own life experience. Now, if that happens, like you've described, it is a great gift that life is delivering for the concepts to kick in and start delivering change. And I'm sure, after a year or 2 years, X amount has happened. And then after 4 years, everything will have changed. It will have moved on. And you'll look back and you'll think, oh, the way I was looking at things in year 2 is not at all how I'm looking at them in year 4. And how I was looking at it in year 2 is not at all how I was looking at it in year 1 or in year, it really is a process. And that's why, even if we have an insight in the moment, it feels like it's the absolute truth. It's sort of the truth for us at that point in time. And then that insight, at some point, we will start it gets refined even further. And then it almost can become irrelevant at some point. And now when it happens, to think that it will be almost irrelevant is unthinkable, because it has this quality to it that, I've seen the truth. And it's a everything's always being discarded. So even the insights merge into something else. But what you've described to me is very encouraging, because it's clear that the teaching or that life is delivering the teaching, and it's sinking in and it's making change. And it's, for you to be able to, and I wasn't suggesting, you're just at, 2 months or 6 months.
No, I understand.
It wasn't because to be able to say, I can just, it's not my job to control this. It's not my job to understand this. That's a huge shift that has taken Matthias very close to freedom. That's the basis on which freedom, sets in. So it's encouraging.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to hear someone say that also, because or you in this case, of course, because sometimes you're just so you feel like you want to, but it's never going to end. But then when you get that small realization of something that feels like, but this is truth. This is not a concept. This is, I cannot control my thoughts. I cannot control my feelings. It's just like, I can't do anything about it. It's not a mind trick that I'm saying to myself to get away from the pain. It's more of a truth, like just it's a natural force that I can't. So it's so nice after all years of struggling with my trying to control thoughts and trying to control the feelings and trying to make sense of it all. It's just so nice to realize that, but I can't do anything about it. So a lot of energy is released that you can actually like, oh, okay, now I can breathe better again. So yeah, I thank you so much for delivering this teaching. So
You're welcome. Thanks, Matthias. And I look forward to meeting you soon.
Yeah, you too. Okay. Bye-bye.
Right. Bye-bye. Hi, Bridget. You're still muted.
Hi, Roger.
There you go. Hi.
Excellent. I'm also new to Zoom, as you've probably guessed. And I actually also woke up and turned on YouTube at the point of the thorn, removing the thorn. I did email you a couple of weeks ago after doing the non-separate intensive.
Oh, right. Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
I remember.
And so it was sort of the perfect timing for me that I'm still quite traumatized by realizing that life is an illusion. And hearing the second thorn, removing the first, does make sense. And I suppose I'm still just looking for that fire to burn them both, because I'm sort of faking it, that that it's not an illusion.
You're
So
sort
I'm
of, say that again.
sort of
You're sort of
faking that,
fake.
because I really do feel the truth is that everything is an illusion.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an uncomfortable place to be in. So I am wanting to use that second thorn to make life easier.
Mm-hmm.
But so at times I go through the process to try and break down and use that insight. But sometimes that can be overwhelming. So now I was thinking just to remain quiet and not think.
Yeah, it's a paradox. I think I replied to your
Yes, and
email, and
that was great. The Zen saying really clicked in.
yeah, you know, if we life is a paradox, as I said at the beginning of the satsang. We end up having to live and wanting to live, realizing it's not really a choice. We realize, oh, this life is here for us to live as the person. And so you would think that if we realize that life is an illusion, that we have to go around essentially living it as if it's an illusion. But that's not the case. It's like we realize it's an illusion, but then we live it as if it's not an illusion. And it's not a choice where we pretend it's not an illusion. It's that if we drop as a seeker, and it's not really us dropping it of our own volition, but if the process takes us to a point where we go, oh, so, like a thought comes up, well, who cares if it's an illusion or not? I'm going to live life. It would be, the thought might be, it would be a crime not to live life. And then all of that happens. And then at some point, there's no thinking about it anymore. You just get up in the morning and you say, oh, here I am again. And you get on with living life. The process by that stage has dissolved the psychological self, dissolved the suffering. So then you get on living life without suffering. Up to that point in time, or before that point in time, the process will take us through different phases where the integration hasn't really happened. And the process knows, I guess you could say, what it's doing. And there's a time when it's demolishing the old house, for example. And because the new house, I'm using a metaphor, hasn't been built, you can't landscape and you can't enjoy the new house and the landscape gardens because they don't really exist. So the process is really a process that goes step by step by step. It ends up being one where I'd say life is an illusion, but we live as if it's not pretending, but just literally the notion of it being an illusion sort of falls into the background. It's secondary. It's not so important. And to the psychological self, a lot of the concepts are very challenging, and so it feels uncomfortable. So what you're describing and what you might be experiencing is the uncomfortableness of the still existent, maybe diminished, but to some extent still existent psychological self that is feeling very challenged by some of the concepts or some of the realizations. So the psychological self doesn't have a place if it accepts life as an illusion. The psychological self doesn't have a role if it's not the doer. And so just doesn't like some of these concepts, feels very challenged and very uncomfortable. And that's sort of, unfortunately, part and part of the territory, I think.
I think what it is, it's just that I'm stuck on a couple of loved ones have recently died. And it's the thought of them that I've never lived, that I've never loved, that there's never been love there with them. That's what I'm attached to, is those loved ones, and thinking that everything was an illusion. So the other parts of life, it doesn't worry me, but I think it's just with that.
Well, I mean, clearly, love as a feeling is part of the. So it's a bit like if you have a magic trick is an illusion, but it exists as a magic trick. And a dream is not real in a certain sense, but it's real as a dream. And life is not real in a certain sense, but it is real as an experience. And so the experience of life exists. Within the experience of life, we have all sorts of subcomponents of that experience, including the emotion of love. And so that exists as part of the experience of life. So love is something that is part of life, and so are all of the other pleasures and pains and emotions, etc. It's just not necessarily what we thought it was, or it's not there because of, for the reason we might have thought, because we just had this completely different idea of life. But in the same way as in a dream, if the dream character met another character and felt love and shared good times, you can't take that away from the dream character, even if you were to say, I mean, the dream character could take it away from themselves if it's destined in the dream for certain feelings and thoughts to come in and make the dream character feel like, oh, well, it's completely worthless then. If this dream is not real, then what I experienced as love in the interaction between myself and, partner or friend, a certain thought could exist in the dream that makes the character feel despondent and like it's worth nothing. But I don't think that relationship to the experience is the truth, is necessarily the balanced or the only relationship to the experience that can. I don't think that despondentness is the balanced conclusion, because there is a character, another character, they interact, they're on the same level of existence, and there's a feeling of love. And so on some level, love is real, and the characters are real, and their interaction is real. Maybe not on an ultimate, like if you take it to the ultimate point of view, nothing ever happened. But I think if the character holds on to nothing ever happened as a concept, that's a distortion rather than a truth.
Because then with this whole illusion thing, then I feel, well, this is nothing either. But there is no truth to anything. Even my spiritual path is an illusion. It just goes round and round, So sometimes I'm comfortable thinking, okay, I'm living, But then I'm in both.
Mm. So
I'm in both.
I'll just point to something, and this is relevant to what Matthias and I were talking about, where his conclusion was, I don't know. One thing that we can know is that I exist. Now, we can't know it at will, in a sense. Like someone would say, what do you mean I exist? You go, or someone might say, well, yes, I can say I exist. That's not what I'm pointing at. I'm pointing at a deep abiding as self, or as the consciousness prior to thinking. And in relation to what you're talking about, the knowing oneself it transcends the idea. In a way, it's what allows us to see that life is not as real as we might have thought. But the self, when there's an abiding in self, the question of is it real or not real just falls away. It is the one thing in life where abiding as self, it's the one undeniable thing. I exist, not as a thought, but as something much more essential, primordial than thought. So when we're lost, we're usually lost because we're not grounded in self, in the I am. So I bring it up because that can be a useful beacon to not desire or crave for, but just it might arise. I am. What does that mean? There might be some contemplation about it, and it's the very essence of who we are. Now we can't at will land there or find ourselves, but if that becomes something we recognize as important, it's much more likely to start presenting itself than if we just go round and round in circles trying to think our way out of the problem.
I think that's what I will do. And as you've said in the past, is just stop. Just stop and go back to I am. And it will work itself out.
Yes, that's the progression. That's the way that the journey points, is towards a movement towards a realization of that I am, and it will work itself out.
Thank you, Roger.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Daniel, hi. Seems like there is an electronic hand for people, just in case people are unaware of that, but I did see your hand.
Yeah, I just couldn't find it now. I'm sorry.
No problem.
So first of all, I'd like to thank you. I've been following you for 2 years now, and it's just amazing, really amazing.
You're welcome.
And yeah, that's my first question I'm gonna ask you ever, because I never seen that brought up before. And okay, I'll go straight to the point. According to the teaching, your teaching or the teaching, suffering is supposed to be more harmful than you consider, like suffering is like the most harmful thing and we have to avoid it. Okay, and I can understand that. But in my case is a very specific one. I have some weird type of sickness, okay? And my biological suffering tends to be more more hurtful than the psychological. Okay, and my story is a bit weird, but I'll try to make it short. I have some digestion problems, to say the least, and it's a very I can't digest food properly, and so the toxins leak into my bloodstream and goes to my brain. And that's the funny thing. It causes me psychological suffering, disturbed mind, racing thoughts, and that type of thing. Okay, so my biological input generates psychological suffering, and through the years, I've been looking into it, and I've found like a couple of foods that I can eat that are less harmful to this condition and things like that. And what I'm trying to get into is, okay, so for me to have those kinds of foods, I need to, for instance, I need to buy a land so I can grow my own food and I can control those variables. So my biologically, I don't suffer. Okay. So I need money, and if I need money, I have to work and all that thing. So basically, I understand that I'm suffering because I am attached to the outcome of having money and buying land and doing that. But to me, it seems like a good trade-off. I prefer this kind of suffering over the biological suffering I will have in the future if I don't have the proper material conditions, financial conditions, and not financial, but everything that I've worked in, you know what I mean? So what I'm trying to ask you is, I'm completely attached to the outcome of buying the land and growing my own food, and not just because of that. My nervous system is really messed up, so I'm really sensitive to noise and all kinds of stuff. So I want to be alone. I'm really, I'm 100% attached to this, and I suffer because of it. But to me, it seems like a good trade-off. I prefer to suffer psychologically than to endure my biological shortcomings in the future. So my question is, does that seem like a reasonable trade-off? Am I destined to choose between a rock and a hard place? Or am I twisting the teachings, and you know what I mean? And I'm seeing this in a twisted way, and I shouldn't like be so attached to this goal.
So attachment doesn't mean that you will achieve the goal. The attachment is something on top of the understanding about why certain outcomes are important. So you have described why it's important for you to aim towards having some land that you can grow your own food on. You know why that's important. The outcome isn't in your control. If you think it is or want it to be, according to this teaching, that's just a delusion, right? We understand why we would want to think it's in our control, because if we think it's in our control, then you have some sense of being in control of your destiny, being in control of fixing the problem. What the teaching says is that's not something that we have. The fact that we're not in control of outcomes doesn't mean those outcomes aren't part of your destiny. So what I suggest is you are clear on what you think the solution is. You might be wrong, but you may also be right in terms of what the solution is. And do what you can in order to achieve that solution. And being clear on that situation and doing what you can to achieve the solution doesn't require attachment. Attachment is something additional on top of that, and it doesn't help. If anything, it just creates suffering in this moment. So you don't need to have suffering in this moment to potentially fix the biological pain in the future. You can do everything. Well, it will all happen according to destiny, but there's no reason why destiny might not include the land and the growing of the food and the fixing of the biological problem. And all that can happen without attachment to outcome.
No, I understand what you're saying, and not just about my case, but in general. What's your opinion on people who present some kind of, let's say, mental illness, to put it simply, but someone who biologically has something wrong and affects this person psychologically?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that this teaching can be followed just as some healthy person would in those types of people with mental illness and that kind of stuff? Will they take the same advantage, the same benefits that a healthy biological individual would, in your opinion?
Well, it depends what the psychological manifestation is like. In this teaching, psychological means guilt, blame, and pride, worry, and expectation. So if, for example, someone has a mental illness that creates a restlessness, let's say, an inability to sit quietly or whatever, and that restlessness is painful, it's not pleasant. If that person's attitude is to that restlessness, if the attitude is, the reality is, if I had a choice, I wouldn't choose the affliction of feeling restless, not being able to sleep at night, maybe. But I don't have a choice. If this is what happens in the person's mindset, and if that thinking then means that there is some acceptance, you could say, or non-involvement in the restlessness, then that person, even with a mental illness that is creating certain symptoms, there is a recognition that that's their destiny. And that recognition means a non-involvement with that. If that isn't there, then there is the restlessness, and then there is an involvement in the restlessness that adds an extra layer of suffering on top. If someone has an illness that forces them to be involved in the flow of life, which means involved in the restlessness, then they're not going to be able to be at peace. But the truth is that someone without a mental illness is afflicted with that involvement in the flow of life. So I don't know whether looking at it as mental illness or not is the best way. It simply is the attitude of non-doership and non-attachment happening, or is it not? Because in anyone in the population, if it's happening, it's happening. We don't really need to know why. The truth is, it's not in the person's control. It's just their destiny. And if it's not happening, it's not happening. It's not in their control. It's their destiny. And so regardless of why it's happening or why it's not happening, that becomes less important. The reality is no one is able to control their attitude. And the attitude of doership and attachment is very present even in people who, according to medical standards, would be classed as not having a mental illness.
Yeah, because I think the model that I've come up with, because in my case, what happens is when my body is not able to filter out, the digestion, the toxins, let's call it this way, and when those things are going on, it's impossible for me to watch a video of yours, for instance. I don't connect with it. I understand logically because, but it's just, I don't. And when my body is doing okay, I automatically, I don't need to make an effort. I just get in touch with your videos and those types of subjects. It's, so the model that I came up with, and I understand that's attachment, but it's like this. Okay, so I need to be healthy, because when I'm healthy, automatically I drift towards, a more I wouldn't call it spiritual, but a more peaceful existence. And I really, I mean, I've tried before. I'm not able, it seems, to achieve that kind of state when I'm biologically affected. So I understand what you're saying, but I just can't get rid of this attachment. I'm trying, but it's hard.
But so you just need to see that if you do conclude what you've concluded, and you say, I have to fix this, what's happened is doership has kicked in and attachment has kicked in. You're not going to fix it. It might get fixed, but it's not going to get fixed because Daniel fixes it. It's going to get fixed because it was Daniel's destiny for the fixing to happen. Now, that might happen because Daniel thinks of the right solution. But even if it happens, so it's going to happen through a mechanism, and that mechanism might look like Daniel fixing it. But that is going to happen according to grace or destiny. So if you see yourself going into the narrative, I have to fix this, hopefully you realize, oh, here is suffering. And that suffering that's not going to help fix it, because even without that attachment, destiny will unfold. And without the attachment, destiny will unfold and you'll be at peace along the way.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you. That's very helpful. I'll try to tune it down, my attachment, as best as I can.
Yeah, I wasn't telling Daniel to tune it down. It was just a description, and that might become part of your up-to-date conditioning. Yeah.
I'll just I hope for that.
Yeah,
that my destiny comes up with this, if possible.
Yeah, but so hopefully the thought arises, even, whether the concept that might arise. Outcomes are not in my control. So do your best. If a potential solution exists, do what you can, but remember the outcome is not in your control.
And just to be clear, your videos have already made a major influence, and I can practice what you're saying to some extent, and already helps me when I'm in that state. I just couldn't, my destiny still didn't come up with the full solution, if it ever will. I don't know, but it's already helpful, and I'm grateful. I just wanted to show my appreciation. Okay. And thanks for your answer now.
You're very welcome, Daniel. Thanks for dropping in. So a concluding thought, is in relation to, for example, successful outcomes. Should we be proud about things that work? And the answer is we will be proud if the sense of personal doership is there, and that pride will mean that the sense of personal doership is there, and at some point that sense of personal doership is going to feel devastated because success will turn into failure, or there will be a failure at some point. That's just part of life. But when we look at on the biological level, we can feel pleased with certain outcomes. And this is not meant to be, hopefully, we don't just relabel pride as, oh, I'm pleased. But sometimes if we don't talk about the biological level, we miss a nuance that can explain certain things. So if your child, for example, performs well, a parent will maybe say, oh, I'm so proud of my child. And it depends what the feeling is. Now, I don't mind the word to say to the child, oh, I'm so proud of you, you did a great job. That's fine. The question is, do we feel pride as in a sense of doership, that this is my child, I made this child and they are so good? That would be pride. Now, if the sense of personal doership falls away, pride won't be there when the child, for example, you see them helping someone in need. But what can come up is a feeling of being pleased. I feel pleased. It's in line with my preference. My preference is, if I see my child helping someone, that's in line with my preference. If I saw a child hurting an animal, that's not in line with my preference. So I wouldn't be pleased. I would be disappointed. Now, being pleased or disappointed doesn't mean that there is a belief in personal doership. One is on the attitudinal level, and the other is on the biological level. And what I often see in the teachings that take one aspect of life, because that's very useful. So some teachings, especially from a top-down perspective, exclude the body and its components. And so things like pleasure and pain are said not to exist. Preferences don't exist because all of those belong to the body. And so certain teachings are pointing at what you are as awareness that is aware of the body. Now, as I said, that's not a criticism of the teachings. I see all teachings working together to deliver what is needed at different stages of the journey. But an explanation of pleasure and pain versus pleasure and pain and being pleased is where you are, it's a pleasure as opposed to, for example, disappointed, that is painful. Now, as long as the attitude doesn't jump onto the pleasure and then crave that the child is only ever going to please you, that would be another problem, which is not the pleasure, but the attachment to pleasure. So I'll just leave it at that. And that might help clarify some questions that some people might have about how can we still feel is it bad to feel good? Is it bad to feel good about positive outcomes? And I say, well, no, positive outcomes are pleasurable. So there will be the biological pleasure, some of which is going to be physical, and other pleasures could be emotional pleasure. So if you saw your child being kind, there would be an emotional pleasure. I'm pleased, but that doesn't mean we necessarily would be claiming ownership over having, made the child into the child that they are. We might appreciate that our parenting had some role to play in it, but then we'd say, oh, my parenting is also just an output of my genes and up-to-date conditioning that I didn't have control over, but I'm very pleased that I was able to have a particular makeup that allowed me to be a certain way with my child. So this is the difference between being pleased and being proud. Thank you.